And I think it's sort of an interesting perspective coming in on that. You know, one of the things I kind of have the reverse experience, right? Is that my career started as we didn't call it wealth advisor then, right? We called it financial planner, but started as a financial planner. And so I had opportunities working with medical practices, right? They'd be C Corps or they'd be S Corps, they'd be, medical corps or whatever you want to move with that. And I had a lot of experience with that, right? The corporate side of it and planning and legacy and partnership and sale and valuation and all these things from that end. And so when I walk in the door at Illinois and there's these conversations about, we're going to do, legacy and estate planning, and we're going to do it for farmers. I was like, well, that is shockingly similar to how we would do it for a dentist. Now, there are, of course, some differences there. But one of the kind of takeaways I got is I think one of the cool things about how we teach a student about investments or legacy or estate, when you have this farm asset, they're learning how to work with a business. And they're learning usually how to work with a small business and a non-publicly traded business, right? And so it's really cool to see someone come out the door and they understand, okay, well, I have some concept of this idea of an LLC and some concept of personal property and real property. And I have all these sort of pieces together. And maybe it's agriculture, or maybe it's real estate, or maybe it's medicine, or maybe it's something else entirely. But they have sort of an underlying working of the operation.
Right, yeah.
And I think that is just incredibly valuable that we teach that. So
it's a great point. The fact that it is a business first, and as a business first, many of the same principles still apply.
Yeah.
But as a family business, it often has a few additional features that you might not get if you were running the local hardware store or something. And so I think those other differences are really important and mean that you have to teach it in almost a specialized curriculum. But
you do, and I think it comes out so much better for it, right? Having those pieces. And, I've gone back and forth in my world about it all, right? But I think I've come to this idea that, students that have a good understanding of a sector outside of just traditional education, tend to do a little better. And I really like that. So that was just kind of a aside, but I did want to talk about it today. Yeah. It's a fun, we can take off our teacher hats now, but I think that was a fun conversation. To the other end, I'd like to sort of get into two really important questions, but I don't just want to answer them on the surface. I want to dig a little with these. All right. The first is the case question that I like to ask people. And the case question has two pieces, right? First up, you've got a consumer, maybe a retired junior executive manager. This person's got $1 million. They've got it in an IRA. Maybe they've got some non-qualified money, and they say, okay, I've got some money in stocks. I've got some money in bonds. I want to put some money and I want to buy into some alternative asset classes. And I've got, let's say, somewhere between $10,000 and $100,000 to do that with. Where does the mind go? Where does your mind go in that situation?
So my mind first defaults to what I was trained to do, which is to think about everything like a portfolio problem. And first, does that asset actually work well with the other things you own? And historically, what we find is, and it'll sound like a broken record here, but low beta, high alpha, and correlation with inflation. So generally, if you just naively solve the optimal portfolio problem, you almost always find that you should add real assets. And agriculture, as one of those possibilities, is a really important one and performs well. But then it's really hard to do. Farmland is a very thinly traded asset. Only 1.5% or so turns over per year. So you can't just go, I'll buy the farms around me this year.
Right.
Secondly, it's very chunky. It's hard to buy a small farm, and it's not going to generate the returns to agriculture transmitted to you if you aren't at scale anyhow. So you essentially have to look for some version of a commingled investment if you're that small. If you're not at the point of saying, I'm going to have an actual operational farm scale investment, you're looking at something that might require some commingled funds. So a couple of the things that have popped up in the last few years, fractional investment platforms have begun to pop up, and they have, to be honest, mixed experience so far, but they're a way of beginning to experience the asset class. There are 2 publicly traded REITs that invest solely in farmland, but they're highly specialized. NACREIF is, as I described, comprised primarily of pension management funds. And so you could designate part of your 401 or 403 into one of the particular funds if you happen to be with a family that has an agricultural fund. But I think in each case, it's a specific asset. So it's not the same as looking through the ticker symbols and choosing something or selecting a mutual fund based on
not quite as
something.
easy as the Morningstar screen.
No, not at all. And so finding that qualified advisor who does know something about agriculture and can begin to put those vehicles together.
Well, no, let's change the conversation then. All right. Instead of $1 million, well, I've got 40 or 50 million.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So now we're in a position where we're looking probably at private equity. We're probably looking at some private credit. We're definitely, yes, we do have some publicly, equity and debt in that portfolio, but now we've hit 50 million, right? We've sold a business. There is an investment to be made in the alternative space. If it's going to be in the ag space, now where does the mind go? And I kind of want you to answer this from the perspective of, if I walked in your office at U of I and I was, maybe on the Dean's Council and I just had this $50 million payday, who do I need on that team?
So the folks, I can tell you all 50 of them are here today at the expo. And so there are entities that will do the privately managed, bespoke, deployed capital with a particular investment thesis. So I want exposure to permanent crops in Southern California because I have some other set of holdings, or I want primarily timber, or I want diversified row crop agriculture. So once you get past the investment thesis, then finding the company that can do those fully managed, generally, investment platforms. Again, they're in the room today. This is part of the purpose of the expo.
Right. Which I think, just to call out again, if you have significant client wealth and you're thinking about alts, this is a place to visit and go.
Yes, it is.